Welcome to Follow Your Curiosity. Ordinary people, extraordinary creativity. Here's how to get unstuck. I'm your host, creativity coach Nancy Norbeck. Let's go. Horror author Mark Morris has written and edited around 50 novels, novellas, short story collections, and anthologies. His script work includes audio dramas for Doctor Who and a Doctor Who spin-off series, Jago Litefoot, and the Hammer Chillers series. His most recent work includes a new novel, That Which Stands Outside, and a 30th anniversary short story collection, Warts and All. Mark's work has won numerous awards, including 2 British Fantasy Awards and 2 New York Festival Radio Awards. Mark talks with me about how he got his start as an author, being welcomed into the horror writing community, the differences between writing his own novels and working on tie-in fiction for franchises like Doctor Who, Spartacus, and Predator, making the switch to writing audio scripts, and more. You'll hear us talking about one of the stars of the Jago and Litefoot series, Christopher Benjamin. Christopher Benjamin was beloved among Doctor Who fans for his portrayal of Henry Gordon Jago, and one of the few actors to appear in not only the classic series, but the new series as well. His 70-year career spanned stage, radio, television, and film, including shows like The Saint, The Forsyte Saga, and the 1995 Pride and Prejudice miniseries. Christopher Benjamin passed away at the age of 90 on January 10th, 2025, and I'd like to dedicate this episode to his memory. And with that, here's my conversation with Mark Morris. Mark, welcome to Follow Your Curiosity.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I start everybody with the same question. Were you a creative kid, or did you discover your creative side later on?
No, I was always a creative kid, I think. I used to write stories for fun. I used to write, when we had sort of school assignments, when we had to write a story, most people would grudgingly write maybe a couple of pages, and I would literally write reams. I would write sort of, 15, 20-page stories in the school exercise books, to the extent that the teachers would, I would always get good marks for them, because I just loved doing it. And they were probably very derivative, but the teachers always read them out in class, because I always used to get great marks, and the teachers would always read them out, which was, the other kids loved that, because it meant that we didn't have to do any work that day. Because they spent the whole lesson just reading my story out, which was great.
That's some serious validation there.
Yeah.
I was going to ask if anybody encouraged you, but I think that might have answered the question. Was there encouragement outside of class?
I don't know. I think I just kind of came to it myself. I just always loved stories. I mean, I think my mum and dad were quite big readers themselves. They didn't kind of push reading onto us or anything, but I just gravitated towards it naturally. And I just always loved stories. And not just reading, I mean, movies, TV, all that kind of stuff as well. I've just always had this love of narratives and love of stories and love of plots and characters. And, it just seems to have been a very natural thing. And I just always wanted to, therefore, create my own.
Yeah, I get that impulse. Yeah. So when did it start to seem like something that you might do for real?
I think probably I went to university at the age of 18, did history because that was my best subject at school. I was always interested in kind of history, because again, it gets down to stories, I guess. But I finished my degree thinking, so what do I do now? I had no idea what I wanted to do, and I always kind of had this impression that I would go into university, and at the end of it, I would come away sort of knowing what I wanted to do, but I didn't. And so I, as a lot of students do, I signed on for benefits, and I just started looking around for jobs. And I'd kind of taken a break from creative writing, because obviously I'd been doing my degree and I hadn't written anything, any fiction for a long, long time. So I just bought a little typewriter and decided to start writing my own stories again. And gradually that kind of slowly took over, and I decided that at some point I wanted to be a writer. So at some point during that period after university, and it took about 3 years before I had my first novel accepted for publication. But in that time, I was writing stories. I wrote a little play. I was kind of writing stories for competitions and things like that, sending things off, finding out about magazines that were open for submissions, sending things to them. Made a couple of small sales, and then it just kind of escalated from there. And it got to the stage where, at the time in the UK, there was a scheme called the Enterprise Allowance Scheme, which would pay you, because I was basically signing on. I was signing on for benefit money, and it would pay you more than the weekly benefit, but it was to set you up in business for a year. So it would give you that money for a year. Every week you would be guaranteed that money. The intention being that, in your first year of business, you probably don't make that much money, don't make that much profit, and that would kind of keep your head above water while you're establishing yourself. So I decided to go on an enterprise allowance scheme. But what I wanted to do was I wanted to write my novel and have my novel ready to market before I went on the scheme. I didn't want to spend the whole year writing a book and then at the end of it think, okay, what do I do with this novel? So I wrote a novel which was called Toady, and I went on the scheme, and then within 6 weeks of going on the scheme, I actually managed to sell Toady to a publisher. So by the time the money for that started coming through at the end of the year, at the end of when the money from the scheme ran out, I was kind of starting to generate money from my books, and I've just kind of carried on since, really.
Wow.
That's
kind of an amazing feat of timing.
Yeah. And who knows what would have happened if I hadn't been able to sell that book, I was just kind of lucky, I guess.
Yeah. Were your parents kind of freaked out that you finished school and immediately were like, hi, please give me money. I have no idea what I'm doing with my life.
They didn't seem to be. They seemed okay with things, really.
Wow.
I mean, looking back at it, I've never really spoken to. I mean, sadly, my dad died in 1988, which was the year that I sold my first book.
Oh.
So he never saw my success. He died very suddenly of a heart attack at the age of 49, and so he never sort of saw my success. So I've never had a chance to obviously speak to him about it. But I've never actually sat my mum down and said, "So what did you think?" For those 2 or 3 years when I was just writing and not having a job and all that kind of thing. I think I was just so single-minded and determined that maybe they just went with that.
Yeah.
Or maybe they just thought I would find my way eventually somehow.
Well, I can say from the number of people that I've spoken to that lack of encouragement still beats discouragement by a lot. It's most helpful to be encouraged, but absent that, not being discouraged is still a great benefit. It keeps you from completely losing faith in yourself.
Yeah, there was never any discouragement from my parents. There was the only time I remember any discouragement, but it spurred me on, was as part of when you were signing on. There was a thing called the Restart Scheme, where people who'd been on benefits for a while were called in for a restart interview. The idea being that they would somehow see where you're up to, set you up in work, or that, if they could, or that kind of thing. And I went in for my restart interview, and I thought, right, I will take in everything that I've written. So I took in a manuscript, and I took in various stories, and letters from publishers and letters from magazines I'd received, just to show that I was actually doing something, that I wasn't just sitting there doing nothing. And the guy who did the interview was sort of a retired. He'd been in retail all his life. He was a manager, a retail manager. He'd just retired, and he said, "So, what are you doing? What have you been doing?" And I said, "Well, I really want to be a writer." And I showed him everything, and he just didn't even look at it. He kind of almost sneered at it and dismissed it out of hand and said, "You're flogging a dead horse there." Those were exactly what he said. "You're flogging a dead horse." He said to me, he said, you're a bright lad. So what you need to do is you need to go into one of the big stores in town, get a job on the shop floor, and work your way up into management, because you'll be able to do that within a couple of years." And I just sort of said, right, thank you very much, and left. And that made me afterwards even more determined than ever to prove him wrong and to do what I wanted to do.
Don't you kind of wish you could find him and say, "See this pile of books?"
Yeah, I mean, at the time I was probably about 24, and he was about in his 60s, so I doubt he's around any longer.
Probably, yeah. Wow. But it's interesting that made you more determined, because there are so many people who wouldn't have been.
Yeah, but it was just the way he was so dismissive.
Mm-hmm.
Right, I'm going to show you, and it was just his attitude that you've got no chance. And I thought, well, people do become writers, they do become actors, they do become successful. So if they can, why can't I?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So you got the first book published, and then what?
So I had my first book was published by a small independent hardback publisher called Piatka's Books. At this time, I didn't have an agent, and Piatka's basically acted as my agent. And this was when it was a horror novel called Toady. So it was a big multi-character 250,000 word horror novel, which were kind of in vogue at the time. And it was at a time when horror was really booming. It was doing really well, and big horror novels were kind of the thing that everyone was reading. Big sort of 500-page chunkers. And so the Piatkas then sold the rights to Toady to Transworld, which was a big paperback publisher. And luckily, because the book was so big and so long, Transworld felt as though they had to put a lot behind it, because obviously it's expensive to produce. So the book came out through Piatka's first in hardback, and then it came out through Transworld in paperback. And Transworld threw everything at it, bells and whistles at it. There were posters in bookshops. There were what we called dump bins at the time, which I don't know if you remember those, but they were big kind of book displays, where you'd have sort of 24 copies of a book in this big sort of cardboard display case, and they were all over bookshops and everything. And because of that, and because of the publicity, I did radio interviews and TV interviews and all sorts of things, which for a 26-year-old kid basically who'd been living in a little bedsit was mind blowing. But somehow managed to cope with it. And the first week of release, the book hit number 7 on the UK bestseller list, so it kind of really hit the ground running. And so luckily, I mean, that's kind of kept me going. I mean, I did then had a 3-book contract with Transworld. And as with any writer's life, or a writer that's in there for a long time, I've been doing this for 35 plus years now. There's lots of ups and downs. There's peaks and troughs. You lose publishers, you lose agents, then you get new publishers and new agents. You have things along the way. There are times when you think, I can't do this anymore. I'm just, I'm not selling anything. And then suddenly something will happen. You'll get offered something, or something, something will come up. And so it's always just kind of kept going. And obviously the more stuff you have out there, then the more your name is out there, the bigger your reputation gets. People know who you are, all that kind of thing. And it just slowly kind of keeps rolling along.
How was it, though, with that first book, when you're suddenly on TV and on the radio, and, you're a kid? How overwhelming. Yeah. I mean, it must have seemed beyond surreal.
It was beyond surreal. But it was also, I'd kind of dreamed of this. I'd been thinking about this, and I'd been thinking, what if it's a massive success? What if I get interviewed on TV? What if this happens? And it was almost like a kind of this self-fulfilling prophecy type thing. I almost felt as though, I'd been dreaming of it, and then it became a reality, and then it happened, and suddenly I was on this kind of gravy train, and it was really exciting. I mean, I look back and I remember thoroughly enjoying it. I don't remember thinking that I was frightened at any point or worried or anything like that. I think there were a couple of times I was on sort of radio shows, and I'd walk in and the other guests would be people off the telly that I recognised, or the writers of a popular BBC sitcom or something like that, and I would feel a little bit overawed, I guess. But you almost adopt a different persona. You almost sort of go into performance mode, and afterward, you can't quite remember how you did it or what you said, or but it seemed to go okay. So yeah, I enjoyed it, and going to the conventions and doing signings and meeting lots of other writers as well. That was brilliant, because the horror community in particular in the UK is very supportive, and it doesn't matter how big the writers are. I mean, I was taken under the wing of people like Clive Barker and Ramsey Campbell, really big name, established authors. So it's been nothing but positive experience in that respect.
That's really interesting too. That must be almost more overwhelming and awe-inspiring than ending up on the TV.
Yeah, it was, because these were all people that I had read and admired, some of them for years. I'd bought their books and I'd admired their work, and yeah, they were just like legendary figures to me almost. And then suddenly to sort of go along to conventions and meet them and be welcomed by them, and looked upon almost as an equal, and to do panels with them and things like that, and was fantastic. Yeah, and a lot of them have now become just personal friends.
Is there a piece of advice that they gave you that turned out to be like words to really live by?
The only things everyone always used to say, and it wasn't particularly to me, but it was always just to just in panel situations. So if you would do a panel, and people would always say, there would always be someone from the audience saying, "What advice would you give to new writers or would-be writers?" And the main things are, and they're very simple things. The main thing is write every day if you can. Even if you've got a full-time job, put aside half an hour at the end of the day or the beginning of the day just to do a little bit of writing. Even if you only write a page a day ends up 365 pages by the end of the year, which is a novel. So always try to do a little, or even if it's just a few sentences or whatever it might be, and do it however you feel comfortable doing it. So whether you have to be sat at home in a quiet room with a computer, or you just take a notebook with you and jot things down as you're sitting on the train or whatever. So that was the one thing. And the other thing was just not to let rejections get to you, because at the end of the day, you might think, "Oh, I've been rejected by this magazine," but you might have been rejected by a magazine, but you've been rejected by one person at that magazine. You've been rejected by one editor. You've not been rejected by a huge number of people. And that, you never know what that editor, what his priorities were, or her priorities were that day, what kind of mood they were in, what they might have been looking for. They might have just read a story that was similar to yours, all those kinds of things. And so just don't be swayed by rejections. Don't think that because you've been rejected, what you've written is bad. Just immediately send it somewhere else.
Yeah, there are so many famous rejection stories. I mean, I think it was Stephen King who wallpapered his office with all of his rejections.
Absolutely,
and so, yeah, I think at least the person who rejected you read it and, wrote you back.
If they give you constructive criticism, then that's great.
Right.
The worst ones where they just say, "This isn't what we're looking for," because it doesn't give you anything. It doesn't give you anything of value. But if they give you some constructive criticism, then I think any writer worth their salt will kind of take that on board and look at it and think, "Okay, yeah, I'll maybe look at those aspects or think about them next time," or whatever.
Yeah. I think people get hung up on rejection, and it isn't necessarily. It's hard. I'm not going to say that getting a rejection in your email is like the best part of your day, because it's not.
Yeah.
but it's not the end of the world either. It's just
it's always disappointing, but we just forget about it and move on. I mean, was it and you were saying about Stephen King, but also I think the first Harry Potter book was rejected about 20 times or something. It was just rejected by everybody, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
one of the advisors in my MFA program was rejected something like 78 times, I think, the first time she published something. And so she just had a hard and fast rule that was, you are not allowed to complain to me about being rejected until you have been rejected at least 78 times.
Fair enough.
Then you can complain. But until then, you're not allowed. Which seemed as reasonable to me as anything else.
Exactly,
Yeah. So you go off to conventions and you meet all of these people and are welcomed into this community, which is fabulous.
Yeah.
And then what came next?
So it's just really been a progression. So I've carried on writing my own stuff. So I write my own novels. I've slowly, through the publishers that I've worked with, got into other franchises. So I've always been a big Doctor Who fan, and through having written 2 or 3, maybe more, 3 or 4 horror novels, I was then asked if I would be interested in writing a Doctor Who book, because I'd mentioned it in interviews and things like that. I'd mentioned it, that I was a big fan, and that was the first thing that sparked my imagination, the first thing that scared me, all those things. And then from that, I was asked to do things like Torchwood, and then things like Hellboy and Predator, and because people realize that you can do this, you can deliver on time, you can deliver to deadlines, you can work to the briefs, all those kinds of things. So then it sort of generates. And also, I always wanted to be an editor as well, because one of the things that I was brought up reading with the I don't know if you're aware of them in the States, but the Pan and Fontana books of ghost and horror stories, which were a real staple for British kids in the 60s, 70s. I think they actually might have started in the late 50s. So every year, Pan Books would bring out a collection of horror stories and a collection of ghost stories, and then Fontana, another publisher, would do the same. And so everyone read these when I was a kid. I remember at school, everyone had books of the Pan and Fontana ghost and horror stories, and they would get passed around and everyone would read them. And so I always wanted to do that as well. I always wanted to be an editor and edit my own series of books. And I'm now doing that as well. So I had a couple of false starts with it. And now I've got a publisher who are keen for that to continue. So it's become known as the ABC of horror now. The reason being that each title is different, because nowadays you can't do the first so-and-so book of horror stories, the second, because bookshops don't like that. They won't just randomly take, say, the third book of a series. They will want every book. So, the longer that goes on, the harder that is, because bookshops wouldn't want to buy, say, 14 books, numbers 1 to 14 to have on the shelves. So what we do now is we still see it as a series, but it's called the ABC of Horror, because the first book that came out, the title was After Sundown, so it started with A. The second book was called Beyond the Veil. The third book was Close to Midnight. Fourth book, Darkness Beckons, etc. So the people who are in the know that each book has a different letter of the alphabet. So if you've got Darkness Beckons, that's book number 4, for instance. So it looks to the casual reader and also to bookshops as though they're standalone anthologies, which they are, but they're also part of a series. So that's how we kind of got around that. So we're now I'm currently editing F. So I'm on book 6 now.
Clever.
Yeah.
So what's it like editing other people's stuff for a collection like that?
I really enjoy it. It's always a little bit nerve-wracking because you're having to judge it just right. So in each of the anthologies that we have, each volume has 20 stories. 16 of those stories are commissioned by me, so they're commissioned from well-known writers. And then we have a submissions window, or the publisher runs a submissions window, which is usually around Halloween, and they get hundreds of stories. They usually get round about 1,000 or so stories from all over the world, and they have a team of readers who narrow that down, and then I usually get sent what they regard as the top 20 or 30 stories. And I look through those, and I select 4 stories, but I don't necessarily have to select 4 stories from those 20 or 30. If I can only find, say, 2 stories that I like, then I'll say, can you send me the next batch of 20? And because sometimes what they consider is the best 20, I don't consider is, the best. So we have 16 from established writers, and then 4 from new writers, because I'm always keen to get some new writers in there, people who quite often haven't been published before, or have only been published in small independent markets or whatever. And so it's nerve-wracking in the sense that those 16 authors, if they send me something, and this hasn't happened often because I usually go with authors that I know are good and that I can trust, that they're going to send me something good. A couple of times I've received submissions and I thought, I just don't like this story. I just don't think it, Luckily, on each occasion that's happened, they've sent me the story quite early. So it's not been like a last minute, on the deadline submission. So it's been a case of I've been able to go back to them and say, I'm really sorry, but it's not really working for me. Would you mind writing me something else? And again, both times they've said, yeah, no problem. I'll do you something else. So that's the nerve-wracking bit. It's always, you always breathe a sigh of relief when you've got your 20 stories and they're good,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you seen those new writers go on to do other things after you've published them?
Some of them have, yeah. There was a writer, was it last year? I think it was last year. It was funnily enough, there was a writer who called Ali Wilkes, who had a novel out, and she had a novel come out from Titan, and I read the novel. It was her first novel, and thought, this is great. I love this. I really love this novel. And so I sort of marked her name down and thought, right, for next year's anthology, I'm going to get in touch with her and see if she'll write me a story. So in the meantime, I was getting we had the open submissions window, and I chose my 4 stories. I always choose them blind because you don't want to be swayed by names. It might be somebody that you've heard of, that might be a friend on Facebook or something who's not published before or something like that. So I always judge them blind, and I got this one story that actually ended up being one of my favorite stories in the anthology. And I thought, this is great, this story from this unknown writer. And so I got in touch with the publisher and said, right, these are my 4 stories. And at that point, the publisher always tells me who's written them. And one of them was by Ali Wilkes, who I'd just read the novel by and who I'd planned to get in touch with for the next volume. So I thought, oh, right, okay, that's why it's so good. It's because she's, sent in this blind submission. Then had a novel accepted, and then so I've kind of gone, got it. So yeah, so there have been times, and it's always nice because you feel slightly vindicated. Then you feel as though, yes, we've, of all these thousands, we've been able to pinpoint the quality.
Mm-hmm. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So are you planning to go through all 26 letters of the alphabet then?
I'm hoping to. I mean, it depends somewhat as well on the publisher. The books obviously have to keep doing well, have to keep selling at any point. I always sign 2-book contracts. So after F, I'm going to have to sign a contract for G and H. And the publisher at the moment is making good noises. They seem to want to keep the thing going. So we'll just see. And then I'm going to have to come up with suitable titles for each of them, which when we get to things like X and is going to be quite tricky, but never mind. I'll deal with that when it happens.
You'll figure something out.
But yeah, I mean, it would be nice, but obviously to get to Z, it's going to be another 20 years.
You have time.
I'm 61 now, so I'm going to be in my 80s when I've finished. And then I think after that, I'll retire and say, right, that's it.
There you go. Has doing the editing affected how you see your own writing?
No, I'm always able. I think I'm lucky in that I'm always able to separate different disciplines, because I've also written audio drama, so I've written script. I've done script work as well, and working in franchises, writing movie. I've written movie novelizations. So you're working from a script. So I've always been able to put them in different boxes, and I never let one kind of bleed over into the other. So I can quite happily edit somebody's work and then just go straight to my, in the morning, say, and then carry on writing my novel in the afternoon, and it doesn't impact on me at all. I don't find that I start writing in somebody else's style or anything like that. I'm always very much able to just distance myself from it and compartmentalize it.
And I want to talk about the tie-in stuff too, because I'm curious, when you've written your own things and you're used to having the latitude to kind of just play with it in your own way, how is it when you're playing in somebody else's sandbox?
It depends on the franchise itself. With Doctor Who, it's easy because Doctor Who, I feel, is like ingrained in my DNA. As I say, it was the first. I saw my first Doctor Who episode when I was, or remember seeing it when I was 4. And this was back in the black and white days. Patrick Troughton was the Doctor. And, as a kid, I read all the Target Doctor Who novelizations, and I was just lived and breathed the series. So I feel as though when I go to Doctor Who, it's almost like coming home in a way. It almost feels like everything else, all my other work, my horror stories, all that kind of thing has stemmed from my love of Doctor Who. Because, as I say, Doctor Who was the first thing that scared me. And from Doctor Who, I moved on to Hammer horror movies and, or Stephen King and all those kinds of things. So that's fine. It's when you're kind of working in franchises that A, you're not really that familiar with, and B, where the deadline is really tight. So you have to familiarize yourself with it very, very quickly. I think the trickiest one I ever did was I was being published by Titan Books, and they do a lot of tie-in work. And they were doing a series of novels based on Spartacus, which was the TV series at the time, which I think about 3 seasons or so. And they had a writer who was due to write a Spartacus novel, and I think he got ill or he had to pull out for some reason. So they were left high and dry, and he hadn't sort of told him. I think he kept wanting to think, he kept wanting to write the book, and he kept meaning to write it and just hadn't been able to. And at the nth hour, he said, "I'm really sorry, but I just can't deliver this book." So they came to me through my agent and said, "Okay, we've got this proposal. Would you be interested in writing a Spartacus novel? The only drawback is it's got to be delivered in 4 weeks. It's got 80,000 words. It will be delivered in 4 weeks." And I developed this. I always try to develop this thing of, if it sounds interesting to me, I don't want to turn it down. I don't want to just go, "Oh, no, I don't think I can do that." I want to say yes and then worry about it afterwards. So I said yes. And I said yes, but I've never seen the series. So, is that a problem? And they said, "Okay, we'll get a courier. We'll give him all the existing episodes in little DVD cases, and we'll get that to you in the morning." This was a Friday afternoon. I was asked this. "We'll get that to you by Saturday morning, and then, take it from there." So sure enough, this courier turned up with a box full of DVDs, and I literally sat and watched one episode after the other and just made copious notes about all the characters, the kind of the way that the dialogue was structured, because it's kind of strangely structured dialogue, and just everything I could think of. And then I had to come up with a storyline very quickly, which I did. And then I literally looked at my diary and thought, okay, I've got 28 days, but, on this day I've got to be here. On this day I'm doing this. So that turned out to be something like 22 days. And then I kind of worked out, okay, 80,000 words in 22 days. That means I have to write, 3.8 thousand words a day, every day without fail. And it just becomes a kind of logistical thing where you just jump into it, body and soul, and just go for it. But having done it, I felt as though, wow, I managed to do that. So I think I can pretty much do turn my hand to anything. So yeah, it is hard. I had to write a Predator novel, which had to be about a military character, and it had to plot his course, the course of his career through. And he was assigned to like a black ops team where they went and fought predators in the different jungles of the world, and to try and repress this invasion and all this kind of thing. So I not only had to do plot this guy's career, and he was. I'm British, and he was an American military man. So I kind of just had to do a bunch of research. And again, it was very, very tight deadlines. I had to just do a bunch of research about how the American military works, all the different levels of it, all those kinds of things. And then just wing it to some extent and try and fudge bits of it because you're not quite sure. And, yeah.
Wow.
It's a challenge, but it's fun. It's usually fun.
Does anybody get back to you with that book and say, yeah, we have to kind of tweak this book because the military doesn't really work like that? Or was it okay?
Really? I mean, there is a kind of artistic license to some extent because it dealt with these kind of black ops teams that didn't actually exist. So you could sort of make bits about them and just base them to some extent in reality. And as long as it sounded relatively convincing, and as long as, you were making the dialogue sound relatively convincing, and you just have to entrench yourself in, Full Metal Jacket, Apocalypse Now, all those kind of things. Kind of get that. How do these guys talk to each other all the time? Just to sort of get it entrenched in your mind. But you had to obviously do it very quickly. So no, I mean the Predator book, that particular one actually got really good reviews, and even from the Predator, like diehard Predator fans as well. Because that, again, is the worry that you feel as though I'm playing with toys that I'm not really that familiar with, and there are a lot of people who are incredibly familiar with this. You can imagine something like Doctor Who. If you didn't know the series and you were writing a Doctor Who book, there is 60 years worth of, TV, books, audios, all sorts of stuff out there. So you've got to get it right or not get it wrong, really.
Yeah, because somebody is going to know.
Somebody's going to jump on something.
Yeah.
Actually, you can't say that because this completely contradicts something that somebody said in that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Somebody's going to know, and they're going to call you on it. Never let you live it down. Yeah. Wow.
You have to let that flow over you. And luckily, I've not had too much of that. It's been okay. It's been pretty much okay.
It's interesting, though, that you're kind of viewing it sort of in an improv kind of way, like, yes, and, and jump in. I mean, as soon as you said that they sent you the DVDs for this series that you'd never seen, I thought, and you have 28 days. How much time did you spend just watching DVDs? I mean, good grief, but I mean, you pulled it off. That's the amazing thing to me, is that's still it almost, because I was thinking when you were talking about the calculations, I was like, this is like a National Novel Writing Month, but more.
Yeah.
Because that's what everybody kind of does with that. You sit down and you're like, okay, so this is how many words a day, 50,000 words for the month and all of that. But with DVDs and prior commitments and all of that, and an actual real publisher deadline. Yeah.
It's a challenge, but I sort of enjoy it now. I think I'm quite good at working under pressure as well. And I'm pretty good. I don't know how, but I've instinctively become good at hitting word counts. In fact, I did a novelization of, there's a movie called Noah. I don't know if you saw it. And it was a kind of a fantasy version of the Bible story. And it was a big epic-y thing with Emma Watson, and I can't remember who was in it now. But I did the novelization of that. And with these things as well, the scripts are kind of ever changing. You'll be writing it, and then you'll suddenly get sent a new draft of the script, and you have to incorporate things like that. But I remember that was an 80,000 word book, and I was writing it and thinking, "Oh, I'm getting really close to 80,000 words as I'm finishing it." And literally, completely by accident finished it dead on 80,000 words. It was literally, the manuscript was 80,000 words dead on. And
Wow.
I thought, wow, I've managed to hit 80,000 words. Of course, then you send it in and they've made little tweaks to the script and it comes back to you and you have to change things. So it ended up not being 80,000 words, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of writing to a script, I know, you wrote one of the novelizations for the 3 Doctor Who 60th anniversary specials. And
Yeah.
God bless you, you got to write the one for Wild Blue Yonder, which is a wild and bizarre story. And I know, the 3 of you who did them were really almost writing them under duress. I mean, you had very specific restrictions that you were under that were not really typical of the tie-in writing experience, as I recall.
Yeah, that's happened a few times with Doctor Who, though. You always have to sign NDAs. Obviously, with that one, it was very tight because, I mean, I went down to I went to Cardiff to see the episode on. I think it was something. It was right at the beginning of the year. It was something like January the 5th. We'd literally come back from a Christmas break, and I then the next day jumped in the car to Cardiff, drove to Cardiff. Stayed overnight, went to the Bad Wolf Studios, saw the episodes, and then the episodes weren't then shown until November. So I had to keep it under wraps for almost a year. And I was, meanwhile, I was writing this book. I mean, the thing with that one, though, is that was one of the most enjoyable experiences I've had because I grew up reading the Target novelizations. The first one I bought was the Auton Invasion when I was 11, and I still have it. I still have my full collection here, and it was just a dream. I always said to my wife, my 2 ambitions were A, to write a Doctor Who novelization, a Target novelization with the Target logo on the spine, and B, to have something of mine made into a TV or a movie or something like that, a TV episode or a movie. So I've now fulfilled one of those final 2 ambitions. Writing the Doctor Who novelization, and it was an absolute joy. I mean, Russell's scripts are incredibly clear and vivid, so they're great to work from, and it was just a pleasure to channel my inner Terrance Dicks, who wrote lots of the novelizations, and I just had this notion that I wanted to write kind of as a homage to him. So not exactly in his style, but in that kind of, very clean, clear, descriptive, hopefully quite vivid way. The only thing with mine, and this comes back to your earlier question about fans and what they say, was that because Wild Blue Yonder is like the mystery story, so there was nothing given away of Wild Blue Yonder beforehand. Mm-hmm. So even when they brought out the early little trailers and things, all the footage was from the first and third stories. There was nothing from Wild Blue Yonder, and they wanted to keep it as a secret and a mystery because it is structured as a mystery anyway. The Doctor and Donna arrive on this big spaceship, and they don't know what's going on, and you don't know what's going on, and beforehand, the viewing audience hadn't seen who the aliens might be, who the enemies might be, what it was. So there was all sorts of rumors about, is it the Master coming back, or is it this, or is it that, or what's happening? And so because of that, I was then told not to embellish the script in any way. So the other 2 guys, Gary and can't remember, it was James Goss did the giggle. So the other 2 guys were told they could add things, they could add extra scenes, they could bring in other characters, they could change things around a little bit. And I was told I couldn't do that. I was told stick very rigidly to the script. And a couple of times I said, okay, the Doctor's on the edge of the known universe at the moment. Or the Doctor says he's as far out in the universe as he's ever been before. But I remember a story from 1975 called Planet of Evil, when the Doctor's on the edge of the known universe that meets up with the antimatter. I said, so could I maybe just drop in a little reference to that, just so that people won't say, oh, but what about when he went to Zeta Minor in Planet of, this kind of thing. And I was told, no, just keep strictly to the script. So, of course, then when the books came out, there were some like critical reviews of it, like on Amazon and things, where people were saying, "Oh, he hasn't bothered to embellish it. We don't know any more about the story than when it was." And so there's a part of you that wants to put your hand up and say, "Yeah, but actually there is a reason for that." But sometimes you can't answer back to those kind of criticisms. You just have to kind of take it on the chin.
Yeah, it's one of those situations where that may be all to the good. It's probably better not to get into a conversation about it, but frustrating all the same.
Yeah.
Well, and I want to make sure that we get a chance to talk about the audio work that you've done too.
Okay.
Because you have done some, and some of it is Doctor Who too, and I've talked to Lisa McMullen, who also writes for Big Finish, a little while ago, and we were talking about the difference between writing for audio and writing for TV. And so I'm curious for you, the difference between writing for audio and writing for a novel. Obviously, you have to strip a lot out for the audio because you're not giving all of the description and all of that, but you still have to give people who are listening a sense of place and all of that. How does that work out for you?
It was really tricky when I first started doing it. When I was first asked by Big Finish, I wanted to be interested in writing an audio. I said I would absolutely love to, but I just, full disclosure, I've never ever written a script before. I've never written anything, and they said, "Oh, it's okay. We'll just kind of take you through it, and we'll help you along." And I found the first one I did was only 25 minutes long. So it was 4 different stories by 4 new writers, and they were all standalone stories. And so it was only a 25-minute story with the 7th Doctor and Ace. And I found it really hard to do. There was some of it was fine. And it was just, I could hear the characters in my head and I could hear them talking, the dialogue and everything. But when you have to match the characters with action, especially when they're doing things, I found that really hard at first. I think I've got the hang of it a bit more now, and I've created ways of doing that, of different methods of doing that, and getting that across. But it is tricky, and it's particularly tricky writing audio scripts because obviously you don't have visuals. I always feel it would be easier to write a film script or a TV script because you can rely on the visuals to a great extent. Whereas when you're writing audio, if there's a new monster or a new landscape or a new alien or you've kind of got to get that across in the dialogue, especially what things look like, and do it without it seeming really wooden and really stodgy, slowing down the action. So I do remember specifically in the first one that I wrote, there was a scene where it's about Howard Carter, and it's about the breaking open of a tomb, of an Egyptian tomb, and it's called False Gods. And there's a scene where the Doctor and Ace are, if I can remember this, it's quite a long time ago. They're running across a desert, and they have some kind of artifact with them, and they're passing it back and forth as they go, and there's something chasing them. And you've got to get that all across in audio. And so I remember that being really, really difficult to do. And I played around with that for ages, and and you're trying to make it seem very fast moving and everything as well. So it's tricky in that also you don't have their inner thought processes, but it's also kind of, which you do in novels, obviously. But it's also kind of liberating in that, as you say, it is stripped back. And once you do feel like you get into the hang of it a little bit more, then it feels as though you can get over a lot of information very quickly, and and it's quite fast moving and it's quite zingy, and again, it's just a case of just playing with it a lot. Just playing with it a lot. You also have very certain restrictions with Big Finish as well, in that they can only have like 6 people in the cast or something, or they can have a limited number. They always have, they don't like really long scenes. So, no scene should be longer than, I can't remember, 3 pages or something. And, so there's all these different things to think about as well. But again, it's just, it's just another discipline, and it's just another challenge. I enjoy doing stuff like that.
Well, and you wrote a story for the Jago and Litefoot series, which for people who are listening and don't know, Jago and Litefoot are two characters from one particular Doctor Who story in the 70s that's set in the late Victorian period. And Jago is a theater owner, and he's quite flamboyant, especially with his language. And when I saw that you had written one that I have listened to ages ago, I was so curious because one of his verbal tics is his love of alliteration. And every time I listen to them, I marvel at how well the people who write them manage to pull that off. So I have to ask how it was for you to write for Jago.
It was fun, but it was quite difficult because you just have to think about what he would say and then rethink how he would say it. So you're constantly looking for alternate words for things. You're looking for the most flamboyant word, which is often not what writers do. They often try to simplify things more. Whereas with Jago, you're looking for the most elaborate, flamboyant, also funny. It's got to sound kind of funny as well. It's got to sound pompous and bombastic and all those kinds of things. So I remember Scout just kind of Googling certain words, and it was kind of, in a way, slower writing his dialogue because you're trying to build it up. You're trying to build it up bit by bit, and it gets easier as you go. But funnily enough, I wrote a novel called The Body Snatchers when the Eighth Doctor Paul McGann TV movie came out in 1996. The BBC sort of took the franchise back from Virgin, and they brought out a whole new range of Eighth Doctor Paul McGann stories, novels. And I wrote one of the early ones it was about the third one, I think, and it was called The Body Snatchers. So that was the Doctor meeting the Zygons in Victorian London, and he meets up with Litefoot. And at that point, I deliberately didn't bring in Jago because I was almost a little bit scared of writing Jago and getting it right. So I came up with this excuse that he'd been ill and he was off somewhere on some coastal retreat or something, recovering from something. And I kind of chickened out of writing him. So that came back to kind of bite me a little bit when I was then asked, "Oh, would you want to actually write for the actor and just write the actual character?" And at that point, I thought, "Okay, I can't say no to this. I've got to do this." So I think I'm pleased with how it turned out, I have to say, and of course, the way he delivers the lines are fantastic, and it sounds fine. It sounds as though it is him talking. So. But it was tricky to write. It was tricky.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think Christopher Benjamin kind of does half the work for you, but you do still have to come up with the words. But he's got that. He's so perfect with it. I mean, and they are such a classic set of characters. I'm so glad that Big Finish gave them a new life.
Plus, though, Lightfoot is really easy. He's really immediate. You sort of see him straight away and can hear him straight away in your head. So that was nice, and that you could just picture him speaking really easily. So he was easy to write, and then Jago was tricky.
Yeah, I can kind of imagine Jago kind of getting in your head after a while, and then not leaving you alone for a little bit, though.
Yeah.
They can start annoying all of your friends, coming up with random alliterations when you shouldn't.
And I do. I mean, the Talons of Weng-Chiang is my favourite ever story. So he is one of my favourite characters. So I just wanted to get him right. I had that extra pressure to get him right.
Yeah. I like I said, I'm so glad when I saw that they had brought them back. I was like, oh, this is going to be great. Because if ever a duo deserved their own spinoff, it's the two of them, and I'm really glad that they got to do them. Yeah. So but So what are you up to next?
I've just delivered a new novel. So that's with my publisher at the moment. Literally last week I sent that in, so I'd finished the edits on that. So I'm waiting to hear back on that one. I'm currently editing volume 6, as I said, of the anthology series. And I'm starting to get some stories in for that. The deadline for that isn't until January the 31st, so I've still got plenty of time, but I've had quite a few stories in, which is nice. And then I'm working on something that, again, I've signed an NDA, so I'm not allowed to talk about it. But it's a what can I say? It's a kind of tie-in, and it's involved with a computer game. So it's not a novelization. It's something that I've had to come up with a lot of the material myself.
Oh, cool.
So I've only had very kind of sketchy bits of material, and I've had to kind of concoct a whole scenario and a whole story out of that. So I'm working on that at the moment. Yeah. And that'll keep me busy for the next few months, I think.
All right. Well, any advice to aspiring youngsters who might want to do something like what you've been doing for the last 35 years?
Yeah, right. Just the usual things. Just write every day. Send your stuff out. Don't be worried about rejections. And also don't turn things down, I think, is, don't sort of say no. Don't feel as though you can't do something. Go out of your comfort zone if you want to. Don't stay safe all the time. Don't just stick to what you feel as though you can do. Just try and do something new. And if it doesn't work out, that's fine. You can stick it in a drawer and forget about it. But I think the more that you do, and the more that you do go out of your comfort zone, the better you'll become as a writer. I found through, jumping into things that it's helped my other types of writing as well. And you kind of get over that thing of, I can't do this, because you feel like, no, I can do this. I can. So it's, just go for it.
Yeah. Stack of DVDs in 28 days will show you that you can do it.
Do it.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much. This is going to be a great conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been really enjoyed it. Thank you.
That's this week's episode. Thanks so much to Mark Morris and to you for listening. I hope you'll leave a review for this episode. There's a link in your podcast app, and it is super easy and really makes a difference. If you enjoyed our conversation, please do share it with a friend. Thanks so much. If this episode resonated with you, or if you're feeling a little bit less than confident in your creative process right now, join me at The Spark on Substack as we form a community that supports and celebrates each other's creative courage. It's free, and it's also where I'll be adding programs for subscribers and listeners. The link is in your podcast app, so sign up today. See you there, and see you next week. Follow Your Curiosity is produced by me, Nancy Norbeck, with music by Joseph McDade. If you like Follow Your Curiosity, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to tell your friends. It really helps me reach new listeners.